And that's Jake with the weekly sports news update.
Yeah.
And that moves us straight into our first topic here. The Super Bowl 58, a rematch of Super Bowl 54, the Chiefs versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, talking about that rematch, that game happened a little bit ago. So just a fresh reminder there, 31-20 Kansas City Chiefs come home with the victory. And Jimmy Garoppolo as the quarterback there. And a lot of people are going to say, wow, they just played a few years ago. These teams are going to look so similar. And I think that's my very first point of this matchup. These teams are nothing like, and especially the Chiefs, are nothing like the last time they entered the Super Bowl. And I'm just going to name off some of the biggest performers in that Super Bowl, and you stop me when you hear a name that is still on this roster.
Okay.
Brashad Breeland, Tyrann Mathieu, Daniel Sorensen, Kendall Fuller, Anthony Hitchens, Terrell Suggs, Tyreek Hill. Like, whoa. If you look at that game, most of the stats on that defense are to players that are no longer on the Chiefs. Yet the Chiefs might have a better defense today than they had 4 years ago. What do you have to say against that?
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point. It's a new team. It's going to be a whole new ball game, but it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, and if you're looking at almost any statistical stat, the Chiefs are second in total defense so far this season. And I mean, talking about the names, other than some of the names that have been there for many years now, a lot of these are young guys who haven't quite had their name out there yet. And this week, we're starting to see that for the very first time during these meetings leading up to the Super Bowl, these interviews. I love these interviews that come in. You get the young kids asking questions to Patrick Mahomes and all these guys. You get old guys asking questions to the young guys. And it's a fantastic line of questioning this week. And you learn so much about players that otherwise just would not have their name in headlines at all. So spectacular week. 49ers, adversely, I mean, certainly have lost some players of their own. DeForest Buckner goes to the Colts. Jarquiski Tart and Richard Sherman, of course, not on that defense anymore. Yet I think comparatively, Kansas City definitely has replaced the most on defense. And spectacularly, that's their best unit right now going into Super Bowl Sunday. Would you agree with that, Jake, that Kansas City Chiefs, their strongest unit is their defense and not their offense?
I would agree with that. And I have a point I was planning on making later, but I'll just go ahead and make it now. I'm just gonna say my prediction for this. I'm going with the Chiefs. Okay, so I've bet against Patrick Mahomes earlier in the playoffs. It didn't work out for me. I don't want to bet against Patrick Mahomes anymore. He's been playing very well in his last 6 postseason games. He's completed 70% of his passes. He's had 11 touchdowns. I think he hasn't had a single interception. I'm done betting against him. But at the same time, the Chiefs' offense has had some pretty silly mistakes. I'm thinking about penalties against the Dolphins. I believe they had 3 different times they had penalties that wiped out a touchdown. A fumble against the goal at the goal line against the Bills. I'm a little concerned with that. I don't know if these silly mistakes will toss them the game. At the same time, they have Patrick Mahomes. But going back to your original question, I think this defense is pretty strong for them.
Yeah, a foolproof way to find out that somebody at your Super Bowl gathering doesn't know what they're talking about is if they are arguing at any point that the 49ers defense this year is better than the Chiefs. Because simply put, the AFC has had the better quarterback talent throughout, and the Chiefs have locked each one of these quarterbacks down. I mean, it's crazy to see how many games the Chiefs have held opponents under 30 points this season. And when you're looking at this matchup, it's really up to Brock Purdy to not be what fans indicted Jimmy Garoppolo for. And not only Jimmy Garoppolo and the fans, but also that coaching staff, which I think were the biggest reason Jimmy Garoppolo is somewhere else right now. And looking at the difference between those two quarterbacks this year, there has been a lot of similarities. I've talked about those similarities. I've talked about Brock Purdy and the ability to be in the lead and kind of coast a team that's in the lead and is a better team than the team they're facing. Yet, what happens if that team falls behind? But that is what we got to see versus the Lions, and that's something we never got to see versus anybody versus Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers is somebody in the NFC really got the push the 49ers, had them down, and in the second half of a playoff game, Shanahan and Brock Purdy were able to do something that they simply have not been able to do for many years now. And so maybe Brock Purdy is that difference maker. This is a big game. This is going to be a big measuring stick for Purdy on just how good is Purdy in the sense of we know that the team is fantastic, right? We know that the offense has all these weapons. We know that the 49ers are dominant on offensive and defensive lines. That's their memo. We know Kyle Shanahan's one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, and we know that front office is going to supply that coordinator with all of the best talent that the league can find. So I don't think this is as much of a win as you were stating. I know I haven't given my opinion yet on that. I think this is so big for the 49ers. I know that we're in Chiefs homeland, so it's all going to be about the Chiefs. Go Chiefs! And, Chiefs won last time. Patrick Mahomes. I'm not going to try to do his voice, but it's huge around here. But looking at the 49ers after dropping that Super Bowl, and especially Kyle Shanahan, now 0-2 in Super Bowls, going into his third one, and some of the topic this week has been kind of what is his legacy after this Super Bowl if it doesn't go his way.
Yeah, I think if it doesn't go this way, he's going to be judged until he can get over the hump. I think he's going to be as the guy who's good enough to get him there, but the guy who can't get the job done.
Yeah, I think a little bit controversially to you, and I think you bring up a point that is just simply going to be there, right? That is a take that will just exist until he finally gets that Super Bowl and lifts it over his shoulders. But, I mean, simply put, Kyle Shanahan is undoubtedly one of the best offensive minds in the game today, if not the best offensive mind in the game today. It's hard to say that, but, I mean, talk about his opponents. If you want to say Sean McVay, I mean, the only one that stands and overpowers is Andy Reid, who he'll be facing. And I think that's the big point of what I'm talking about. Let's go back to who Kyle Shanahan has had to face in the playoffs, in the Super Bowl so far. He ran against the Patriots. We all know the 28-3 in Atlanta when he was just an offensive coordinator, wasn't actually a head coach. Yet, I will say, was possibly the most influential coaching on that coaching staff to be able to bring the Atlanta Falcons to that point and make Matty Ice an MVP, not just a candidate, an MVP that year. It was just spectacular considering what that team was before, what that team's become after. It's hard to argue that Kyle Shanahan just isn't one of the best minds in today's game. I don't see this as being a big deal. Because you talk about last game, 31-20, it's a close game. It was a lot closer than that as well. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, 2 interceptions. I, of course, did score 2 touchdowns and also ran for 1 as well. But, I mean, the margins are just so thin that if Brock Purdy is just enough, this will be just the biggest win for Kyle Shanahan, getting over Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes when they figured out to do it all year. This Chiefs team is not worse than any of those other Chiefs teams. It's different. That's what people are going to have to understand. This is just as hard of a test for Kyle Shanahan as Super Bowl 54. This is just as tough. It's a little bit different of an equation. You no longer have to worry about Tyreek Hill over top and Kelsey underneath with another great receiver kind of making the move there. Sammy Watkins was actually that great receiver, had 98 yards in that Super Bowl. That's not going to be this Kansas City Chiefs team. So I think defensively, 49ers have to feel great. But when it comes down to Kyle Shanahan against the Kansas City Chiefs defense and Spagnuolo and what Spagnuolo's been able to do with that defense, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a chess match each down. It's going to be, how many is Spagnuolo sending? How many, what protections does the 49ers have? What protections can Brock Purdy get them into? Because if Brock Purdy loses that battle against Spagnuolo, it's going to be a very rough day for that 49ers offense. It's going to feel a lot like it did 4 years ago.
Yeah, I just want to go back here real quick. When I when I think of players or people who are involved in sports who were so good at what they did but couldn't get the job done. I know this is a little different because it's a different sport and different coach versus player. I think of Charles Barkley. Maybe that's because I see him on TV every Thursday, and Shaq's always talking about, you never won a championship. But but do you? I don't know. It's just there's always going to be that, I guess, dark cloud there if you can't get the job done.
Oh, certainly. For Kyle Shanahan, there's no doubt that dark cloud will remain because it's there, right? I don't think there's any discrepancies that it's there. That 28-3, it was there, and we saw it in Super Bowl 54, before Super Bowl 54, that cloud was there, and I only think it got darker after Super Bowl 54. I think this is a spectacular place for Kyle Shanahan to find himself, because I think this is a game that's very winnable. Yet, at the same time, 0-3 in Super Bowls is a tough thing for him to get over. I'm sure he'll be fine. Mike Shanahan, of course, his father has plenty of Super Bowls and a direction to lead that. And then, of course, the 49ers aren't going anywhere. And the 49ers have proven year in and year out they're going to be one of the top teams to compete. And I think that will just wrap up this segment. Thank you so much for listening to KCOU on 88.1. This is the Blake and Jake Show. Back in just a few.